Welcome at SCI-Arc. My name is Elena Manferdini. I want to welcome you all to today's event. We're going to invite 4 of our alumni to show with our current students their thesis from the past. And we're also welcoming all the alumni from SCI-Arc that want to join us today. Part of a lecture series called Format. Every year, we organize this lecture series where we invite guests from outside to talk to our students. And we have one event every year that is very dear to my heart. Is the time where we call our recent alumni to talk to us about where they're at today and where we were at when they graduated from SCI-Arc. So we will hear from 4 of them. We're going to hear from Irvin Shaifa, who has been advised by Christy Bellier and won the Gehry Prize last year in 2020. We're then going to hear from Richard Mapes. David Eskenazi was his advisor, who also got the Gehry Prize in 2020. We're going to talk with Liang Yu, who was one of my students, Elena Manferdini's students, and won the Gehry Prize in 2019. And finally, we're going to close with Justine Poulin, who was advised by Hernan Diaz Alonso. The presentation will last an hour, 15 minutes per student. I will ask all of you to hold your questions for a final Q&A. Irvin, this is your time. We can hear from you.
Hi, how is everyone? Or I guess you can't respond to that, but hello. All right, well, so I'll start it off. And thank you for the introduction. Again, I'm Irvin Shaifa. I graduated last year, and I currently work at Rios Architecture in Crenshaw. And so, yeah, I'm in LA if you ever want to hit me up. Let's see. So my thesis that I completed last year was called Zealots of Compton. And I'm going to share that with you all today.
Wait, they should be.
Let's see.
They should be figuring out how people actually use space and then designing those spaces in a way that will accommodate those uses.
That the basic thing that we need in Compton is a more unified effort on the part of all of the organizations, all of the citizens, the commerce, the industry, and the city government towards developing a spirit of pride of community and a spirit of pride in the appearance of our community.
As I mentioned, gentrification is not the same as revitalization. Revitalization refers to neighborhood change, improvement, upgrading, but it's done from the bottom up. It's usually done with community residents and community organizations, often with the help of public and private sector, but they're improving housing, attracting businesses to the corridor, making the neighborhood safe and clean.
To take us out of the box. Literally and figuratively, we live in boxes. We leave the womb when we're born and get put directly into the tomb. We get put directly into our first square space, which is the beginning of us going from being multi-dimensional and completely imaginative to placed onto a grid.
So we understand everything around us by its parameters. And I'd say in the practice of architecture and urban planning, these parameters in my thesis are called the sort of bounding box. Now, the bounding boxes in the city are made up of sort of site conditions, in this case, zoning, city codes, and context. And specifically for Compton, I speak a lot about I'm referencing sort of redlining and conditions put upon Compton that weren't necessarily for in a positive manner the area. So what's seen as a response to the bounding box sort of emphasizes it into like a singular building, which I'm giving that example being the sort of Compton Courtyard House. But in Compton, these bounding boxes are actually shifting, growing, evolving to assist in sort of long-term development of the community. And the Zealots of Compton introduces a mode of architecture and urban planning that furthers Compton's sort of revitalization goals. This is done specifically by the zealot, defined as multiple buildings in the bounding box that are incremental in how they fill the box, and are created and oriented based on unique qualities of its environment, not on sort of past parameters. Compton's zeal is the revitalization and growth of its communities, and the zealot terminology emphasizes that passion to commit to long-term growth. It's sort of the zealot, or it's sort of its focus, its main focus and only focus is a sort of positive progression of Compton. The thesis sees importance at all scales. A sort of barbershop and a hair store sort of had a sort of bounding box limit of sort of 25 feet. Originally sort of tailored for, at the time, white suburbia, has now increased its bounding box limitations to sort of mixed use zoning. So in this image, what you're seeing, this sort of hair salon, which at the time was just a tool shop next to a bunch of single family housing, now has a way larger height limit. And so this is where the thesis comes into play. How do you build upon the bounding box, and how do you surpass its limitations and create architecture that looks forward to the overall growth of the community? The scheme I sort of did it is essentially, or the scheme of the zealot essentially is to sort of do these incremental additions that are gestural and some would even say dynamic in how they orient in the box to sort of speak on further growth within those conditions. So what happened was these two buildings within the lot that were sort of divided by a parking lot that wasn't even used since 2008, upgraded its facade with sort of a new paint job and signage at the time. But it's the spirit, the zealot, that pursues to manifest, but in density within the bounding box, and to actually expand upon that. So the collage begins with a bridge that connects with two businesses together. Over several years, the barbershop and the hair school expand to two additional zealots, hosting a beauty school and a salon at the scale of a room. And the zealot collage itself within the pre-existing conditions of the barbershop, framing the collective narratives that happen within these spaces. The crop, the taper, both terms referred to when, talking about, haircuts, are terms zealots use to create dynamic spaces, not confined to its boundaries. The intersection between the old and the new, vibrant in tone, transformative, is how we understand form in relations to the scale of the community. The goal of dynamism at all scales relates back to the exterior of the barbershop. The zealots are cantilevering over the roof of the sort of original hair store. A barbershop that pursues integration, expansion in the bounding box, now reaching at all height limits. And so as I went through this thesis, to sort of emphasize the term thesis, I wanted to test it out on different scales. So we went from the sort of barbershop, and I'll be presenting to you all a community center. So the conversation of boundaries and collaging buildings translates to where I'm going to be showing you the civic scale. Across the Compton Federal Building is actually a singular building, a sort of bodega, which is kind of hard to see in this image, but where I'm standing in this image is where the bodega is. And let's see, right there. And so next to it is actually this park that's vacant. Kind of like the parking lot of the sort of barbershop, and the bounding box hasn't increased in scale since then, but it has or not the bounding box, the sort of bodega hasn't increased in scale since then, but the bounding box currently has a 75-foot height limit, and that's definitely not 75 feet there. So it emphasizes yet again that the zealot must be more than a building, but a sort of catalyst in the effort of revitalization. And Compton's projected growth is something that allows for the zealot to sort of act upon, making the bounding box sort of inhabit on multiple floors and not just the ground floor of the bodega. So let's see. So the ground floor, once vacant, I add to the bodega. Then the next step, or I'd say a year or two from now, you sort of add the sort of community center. to those shopping district, something that allows this to be a yard, something that allows this to be at the scale where someone could walk around this whole thing, this park, and these separate buildings. And okay. So the ground floor, sort of once vacant, sort of added that elevated park that I was talking about. The fourth zealot sort of continues. And so the library across the, so basically at this point, I'm sort of talking about looking into the thesis and seeing, okay, I'm working within these, this bounding box, and that's essentially what the zealot sort of smashes against and works within. And as the box develops, the zealot sort of expands and multiplies. But now it's, I guess at this point, it was time to see the thesis that the bounding box may not be the actual but it might even be the neighborhood. So looking past the scale of what we consider the room and seeing that your lot is actually just a room with many rooms next to it. So by the time I hit the fourth zealot, it sort of reaches out beyond this sort of elevated park out into the library, now sharing similar programs. So it becomes this whole entire part of Compton then becomes this place for the community. So the zealot sort of pursues and continuing the conversation every frame and space, sort of focusing on the growth of that and expanding viewpoints that were once privileged to sort of the tall federal building across the street and are now for those to sort of enjoy. So to work within the bounding box, I'd say, is to surpass it or even grow with it. They're all decisions linked to sort of community need, rather than, maximizing boundaries that aren't truly actually there. And the zealot at the scale of the barbershop or at the scale of a community center is a fanatic in this case, uncompromising in the long-term development of one's community, configural and growth. It's positioned itself in the practice as more than an adaptive reuse project, but additive. Its boundaries are merely highlighted as negotiations of the growing neighborhood city grid. Thank you.
Thank you, Irvin, for the great presentation. I would like now to ask Richa Mates, who was advised by David Eskenazi, to take it away.
Hello, thank you, Elena, and thank you, Irvin. I love seeing your project again. I feel like we're back in studio talking about these ideas again. It's very exciting. Let's see. So for my presentation, oh, can you see my screen? No. Yes, okay. So for my presentation, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about what it was like to be in thesis during 2020. So I'll have the video of my final thesis presentation playing. If you want to watch it, I'll add a link that you can go watch it later. But I think it's, kind of important every once in a while to talk about the process, which for me, I think kind of started a long time before the thesis term began. And the general kind of takeaway from my experience at SCI-Arc is that I need to trust my gut, generally follow my interests, realize that those interests are important, that they're valid, and that they add value and beauty to the world. So I did come to SCI-Arc with kind of like a gut feeling about what I wanted to do. Wasn't entirely sure exactly what that looked like, but I decided early on that I wanted to engage a lot of my classes as forms of laboratories or experiment grounds where I can kind of test the boundaries of my ideas. And there were many, many ideas, many things that I tested in a lot of different settings, a lot of things that failed miserably in a lot of cases. But generally throughout that process, I was able to kind of come up with some really interesting ideas that ultimately culminated in the thesis. And one of those ideas, interestingly enough, came from Damian Jovanovic and Angelica Lorenzi's visual studies class, my first year, called Become the Internet. That's where the title of the thesis came from, The Perfect Boyfriend Builder. It was a cheeky mistake meant to add some humor to the morning class when we were all tired, but it quickly became a driving force behind the production of abstract aesthetic scenes, and a concept that guided a process of identifying objects to add to scenes and the process by which those objects were added. So for example, this is an image from that course. Deflated bodies, for example, could be raw materials that the perfect boyfriend builder needed, or they were failed attempts at making the perfect boyfriend. Depended on the way that you saw it. It was both of those things simultaneously. But that helped me set up a way of working and exploring that ultimately led, experiments like that ultimately led to me taking courses that were a little bit more targeted, things that I was a little bit more interested in as I began to understand myself through these experiments a little better, like queer aesthetics, a class taught by David Eskenazi, which for me, the biggest takeaway was that queerness for me and for many other people becomes visible through the reorganization of existing things to be more accessible to queer people that engage the world in different ways than what is normal. They're reorganizations of things based on different priorities for creative acts, which also become constructive acts, self-building, self-visualizing acts. But that had me also thinking about like what's the role of my voice in architecture in the world these days. And it was through an event organized by Underscore, which was organized by Irvin and myself and Corey Yaguchi. And the event was called The Personality of Architecture, which was a panel discussion between Mira Henry, David Eskenazi, Marcel Ngao, Damian Jovanovic, and Angelica Lorenzi. And my big takeaway from that event was a question about, where does my voice fit into architecture? And, it's somewhere between the single architect genius and the nondescript nebulous community-based design. So the question was, how do we make architecture that is distinct? How do I make architecture that in some way has personality for the sake of making it accessible in new ways to new people? And then the bomb dropped in 2020 with the pandemic, but the intense events of that year kind of served as the evidence of the culminating need, or a culminating, I guess, question about, how exactly we as individuals fit into the world in 2020 and in 2021. And it was a very important question that ended up kicking off the thesis term. So the way that I approached thesis in the midst of all that was I realized I needed to approach architecture and design and art from a perspective of many different priorities for building simultaneously, and questioning some of the assumptions that I had about architecture highlighted kind of some of the assumptions that I had about design. And I decided to kind of orient the beginning of the thesis around different ways of seeing or exploring an architecture. But more specifically, I decided to embrace the idea that reading architecture could also become a constructive act. Reading being an important kind of like colloquial term among queer people. You read someone is, for me, it became an important act of also like self-construction, but then also the idea that I can construct things using forms of collage. So the beginning of the thesis started with these somewhat haphazard seeming collages, which I then read as the basis for various scenes that ended up in the final presentation of my thesis. And some of these collages were fun, some of them were odd and uncomfortable, and some were outright just problematic. And I decided not to shy away from some of those intensities. In fact, I learned to embrace some of the things that were coming out of these collages, some of the things they were beautiful, they were exciting, engaging, familiar, homely, terrifying, disgusting, hopeful. But the takeaway for me, the big takeaway, was that these collages produced very strong effects. And it was the strength that was interesting and alluring. It was the personality that was alluring. So instead of beginning with kind of defining a concept for building, instead I decided that reading these collages and reading various environments was the constructive act that I wanted to begin with. And I think, yeah. So some of the things, Hans Hollein's jewelry shop in Vienna, where the subject of metallurgy and metals became complicated by making HVAC and lighting systems out of bronze and other things that we would consider to be precious metals, or too precious to make building systems out of. So visitors to this jewelry shop have a different understanding of the origins of metals based on the architecture that blurs the distinction between value and worth. Some of the other things I was looking at were Anna Udenberg's sculptures, combining domestic materials and automotive materials to make new pieces of furniture that were odd and somewhat uncomfortable and yet distinct. The best stores in Houston, these got a lot of press over the last year, so I'll skip that. But most importantly, Cindy Sherman's portrait titled Untitled, number 175 from 1987. Thank you to Marceline Gao for speaking about this one at the Personality of Architecture. It made a huge impact on me. But the most important thing about this was that I realized that this was a portrait of a body dealing with bulimia, but the body was not necessarily present in the portrait. Instead, the body was visualized through the collection of viscera in that portrait itself. So that put the title, The Perfect Boyfriend Builder, back into play for me, because I realized that I could investigate different characters of, again, kind of the absurd perfect boyfriend in order to begin constructing these various strange environments and manipulating them to become different things by changing the references to which I was working with, which can be seen here in the interface for the Perfect Boyfriend Builder. So in the end, what I think I was most interested in was unveiling things that were inadvertently hidden. Just like, again, an act of queerness to me is making aspects of one's character and personality visible, bringing those to light. And it's important for me also to note that the majority of the civil rights movement in the United States, the queer rights movement, has hinged on a notion of visibility. Harvey Milk said, "I would like to see every gay doctor come out, every gay lawyer, every gay architect come out, stand up, and let the world know who they are." That would do more to end prejudice overnight than anyone would ever imagine. So by kind of revealing some hidden qualities of who the perfect boyfriend builder might be, by building these strange environments that were inspired by that person, that absurd person, I was also investigating the organizational rationale of space, aesthetic priorities, and the relationship of those things to each other that in the end, what I would call a form of spatial portraiture, which was the punchline of the thesis and the ultimate statement that came out of it. It was a portraiture of the spatial surround that can be read in order to understand the organizational rationales and priorities that made that space. And the open-ended question being left at the end of the thesis was, if I'm living in a story, can I be sure that that story is mine? How can I be part of that story? How can I connect with other people in that story? And how can I make it my own? And that is the end of my verbal presentation. So I suppose I'll just let the rest of the video play out.
Thank you, Richard. I know that you are going to join us again, actually, at SCI-Arc, so you will be soon not anymore an alumni, but a student again. So we're welcoming you back in fall, 1 month from now. Thank you, great, for the presentation. I would like now to give the microphone to Liang Yu from Shanghai. So he's on a different time zone here. Hi, Liang.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna share screen. You can see, right? Hi everyone, I'm Liang. I graduated from SCI-Arc in 2019. I'm very glad to be invited by my thesis advisor, Elena Manfredini, to share my thesis adventure, and she gave me many helpful advice for thesis prep to final. And also, I want to thank SCI-Arc to give me the nice platform for the people who love design. So I'm now going to talk about my thesis archive. Hopefully, it can help a little bit. So the content you see is chronologically ordered. So here's some image about the presentation and exhibition. So basically, there was a large rendering at back, as well as 16 pedestals. 12 of them are models, and 4 of them are turntable videos in iPads. So I start from thesis prep. So basically, at that time, Alina and Eric helped me to narrow down about my topic, which I was interested in, and I was trying to explore and define what kind of architect I want to be. And at that time, I was interested about some architectural ideas of object-oriented ontology, which as known as OOO, and I wanted to combine with some design methods, which I have learned from SCI-Arc in those 2 years. And I love manipulating objects by multiple ways, and I was trying to use those techniques to design my thesis. So here are 32 objects which I have designed in thesis prep. I will talk about it later. And so as you can see, here are some references from my thesis prep magazine about objects from nature, theoretical projects, as well as manipulating an inventory of pre-existing forms which come directly from digital toolkits of real objects, the individual figures are intended to lose any associations of symbolic content in favor of the emergence of an uncanny form of architecture. And I tested some basic materials and used it on the finish. So very popular use of the finish and texture is a way to rethink the mundane everyday life rendered as extraordinary. So those are the 32 objects. At first glance, the buildings appear as unique artifacts. But if you look closer, maybe some of them, you can see parts of objects from nature or from my pre-existing inventory we saw. And here is the very initial image I created from thesis prep. So the main idea was simply use those architecture as object to change a skyline of a certain city. However, I was creating a fiction city because there is no more a real condition as a virgin ground for architecture. We live in a world where information is in access and accuracy. Purity and the truth are not engines for change. So I think the subjective image in our memory is the engine for new designs. Chances are high that the image in our memory are not as accurate as it is in our physical world, but the inaccurate or unrealistic images can create something new. So here is the interview from BuzzFeed.com showed when people draw the map of the United States, they draw the version in their minds instead of drawing the map accurately. So we take the image from their subjective memory and we get a new version. And the city we live in are the cities in our minds. In the movie Inception, Christopher Nolan used architecture in real life, as you can see on the left page, to create a city of memory of the main characters. For the main characters, that city of memory on the red page is their reality. Candor, the exhibition from McKelly is Superman's home planet. McKelly found the comic imagery of Candor was inconsistent, which was Kelly's interest in their vagaries of memory. The inconsistent image of Candor are just like human beings' inaccurate memories. And McKelly created a new Candor city from the inconsistent comic image. So this is the image from the final. So I want to say architecture is not supposed to negotiate the real, but negotiate the imagined reality. Architects don't make buildings, instead they imagine buildings. What we call real and imaginary are blending together, constituting an intersected painting of object buildings and a city of our memory. So the rest of image are basically for the thesis, the actual thesis. So from miniature to midterm to go no go and final exhibition. So those archive, I think, is for to show you the challenge for model making. It's like it's not for presenting, but to show how I make those beautiful models. And so the purpose, so the challenge for those model is to make those look like the rendering, especially the finished materials. So luckily, so some of my classmates, Xinxin and RQ, tell me technique about how to make cast resin and make molds. So basically, these are some resin parts. So resin parts are from is basically from the 3D printing parts and also the casting parts. Yeah, so you can see. So at that time, I did a lot of casting. So I use silicone and different method to casting. And this is for my first model, so it was difficult, but the result is satisfied actually. You can see the material under the sunshine and have the nice reflection. And also the second model, and actually so every model I assemble them twice. The first time is to assemble the original parts, and the second time is to take some parts out and cast it and then reassemble it. So you can see a lot of sanding, and when the casting pieces come out from the molds, it doesn't look very perfect. But if I sand it, and it will be nicer actually. And if you keep sand, it will shiny up. And yeah, and keep going. And so my printer just keep on working since the miniature, so it never stop. And also I found the spray on the transparent resin will make a very nice gradient. And also I use some fur and different material to make the object more richer. And those are for midterm, I think. And it was a layout actually, and you can see strap everywhere on my jacket. And go no go and keep going. And I tried some different colors in resin. So yeah, basically just keep going and design the site for each pieces, and use some random object from everywhere, so that it fits very perfectly. So I use that. Yeah, and that was the last casting, I think, and Lana helped me a lot. Here are the foam boards for my printing later on, and those are, so the image on the right are for the pedestals top pieces, and it was my workstation, and yeah, I love it. And yeah, that was me. And yeah, you can see the casting is very beautiful under the sunshine. And my helper, Feng Shuo and Xiaomi Ye Hong, helped me to spray on each pieces, I mean the site for each model. So thank you so much. And also use Stripe video to map on the turntable and to recording a new video to show. And you can also see the final print. And these are the layout for the final exhibition, and it was quite large. So I have to render the image at a very large resolution. So you can see 15 feet, almost 15 by 15 by 15. Yeah, so each pedestal have different lighting. So you can see the whole is for lighting system, but each one is slightly different. So it's like it was a very hard task to do that, actually, labor intense actually. And you can see it's a process to install everything on. And that was the final result. And you can see here also some cable management. Yeah, don't learn from this. An iteration for the final image. So this is the first version, no, the second version from thesis midterm, and this is go no go. And each time I add a few pieces around, and the last time I just added a piece of New York City to make the city unreal, actually, and add more random architect from all over the world. So make the painting is not easy to recognize. And atmosphere. And this is the final render, and it cost 40 hours. And yeah, so archives. So I want to show you some, but okay. Sorry. Okay. So we can go through those pictures quickly. So this is my favorite one. And final image. And this is the Thesis Exhibition. And thank you, my helpers, Lana Yuan, Yehongmi, Shuofeng, Yash. And special thanks to my advisor, Elena Manfredini. And that's all.
Thank you, Liang, for giving us a throwback to 2019 when all the students were live in the space, and to show us what an amazing laboratory of models you managed to put together during those times. Thank you, Liang. And now you are in Shanghai working for Yan Studio. Justine Poulin, she was advised by Hernan Diaz-Alonso. Take it away. We're looking forward.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Elena. Thank you for the invite. It's always nice to participate in some SCI-Arc events. So let me share my screen. Hi, so my name is Justine. I graduated last year from the M.Arch program, and my thesis was called Rabbit Hole. So Rabbit Hole is a short film that explores how multiple versions of the same reality can coexist within one space. So starting off thesis prep, I was very interested by the concept of post-truth and this idea that multiple versions of the same news or fact could coexist within the same environment. I was also very interested by the technique of the mise en abîme and how some nouveau roman writers like Borges would use it to create stories with infinite possibilities and with no universal truth. So for those of you that are not familiar with the concept of the mise en abîme, it's a reflective strategy where the content of a medium is reflected in the medium itself. So the most typical example is when you take two mirrors that are facing each other, and then it creates this infinite reflection between them. So what it's important to understand with mise en abîme is that it is self-referential and it only contains itself. So I thought it was an interesting starting point to talk about post-truth, and then to be able to create a project that would have multiple versions of the same thing, the same thing. So that was pretty much thesis prep. And then, oops, let's see. So after thesis prep, I knew pretty much the concept that I wanted to talk about. I also knew the technique that I wanted to use, but I still didn't have a subject. And then we started thesis. We were all stuck at home, and I thought, why don't I use SCI-Arc as my thesis subject? And in a way, it was kind of interesting because I was making a SCI-Arc thesis about SCI-Arc, so it was kind of a mise en abîme already. Also, it was a good opportunity to start playing with our memory of the building and to introduce lies in the representation of a space that we all knew so well, but that we didn't go to for a very long time. So I first started by modeling the school, and then started to explore how I could introduce the mise en abîme within it. So I used mirrors. I also used reflective surfaces like water to create this kind of replication of the building. I also created like a physical model of the school, and I took pictures, and some of these pictures are also present in the final output. The final miniature, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to have as an output for my pieces. I knew that I wanted to be a short film, and I had a short storyboard for it, and also some references and mood board. And then after miniature, I basically started production. And of course, what I had in mind during miniature is very different than what I ended up having at the end. But still, I think it was a good idea to commit to a final idea of the thesis early on, so I could really start working on final results. So now I'm going to share the thesis. Okay. Okay, so hopefully the sound was on. I got stressed out, so hopefully it was all right. So yeah, the thesis was a mix, as you saw, with between real footage and renders. It was basically 3 days of shooting and then a lot of hours of rendering and compositing afterwards. Sorry. Oh, okay. So for the real footage part, I had the chance. Oh, let's do full screen. So for the real footage part, I had the chance to shoot at SCI-Arc because no one was there, and I also had the chance to collaborate with an experienced cinematographer who helped me a lot with understanding how to do compositing and also how to do good lightings. And it was very nice to have the opinion of someone from another field about my thesis. It helped me to see it with new eyes, also gave me a new idea. So it's something that I suggest to anyone really, to exchange with as many people as you can. So so this is from the watershed, basically. So you can see that the setup was very improvised, but then, you know, like you don't have to have like the most expensive resources, you can still manage to do something interesting with it. And then I did a small behind the scene video that shows basically all the compositing work that I did during the thesis. So I can Okay, and then I thought that maybe for the last few minutes I can talk about what I'm doing now, especially because I'm not following like a fairly traditional architecture path. After ending SCI-Arc, I wasn't very interested in working in an architecture firm, so I was trying to find something else, but I still didn't really know what to do. So I felt like sharing my experience might be interesting for you all. So I work for this company that is called Silent Partners, and we're basically doing digital content for events and shows. So basically like anything that you would see on screen at a concert, but also AR elements or projection mapping we do. Of course, because of COVID, we didn't have a lot of live events over the past year. So we've been working a lot with this other company that is called XR Studio that does extended reality. So it's basically the principle of having LED screens, and then the performer and then the camera is shooting, and then the content is adjusting with the physical position of the camera. So it's a new technology that has been very promising for live entertainment, but also for movies, and that would basically probably replace green screen technology in a few years. So here's an example of how it works. It's pretty pixelated, I'm sorry, but it's clearer on their Instagram. I just didn't have the video. So these are two projects that I've been working on. One back in February, we did this shoot with Katy Perry for Lazada, and again, this is all done in digital production. So the environment was done in Unreal, and then Katy was performing, and she was basically the only real element of this scene. And the thing that we did most recently was this Kid Cudi shoot for Amazon Prime show. So it's like a 25-minute performance. And then again, it was a mix of real footage, but also a digital production. And with the digital production, it was a mix of props and digital content. So in a way, what I'm doing now is kind of connected to what I've been doing with my thesis. It's also exploring these different layers of reality and the mix between the real and the digital. So I guess thesis is just a starting point to what you want to do after, and you should definitely see it like that. So thank you everyone for listening. If you have any questions about thesis or just life in general, you can contact me. I'm also going to be there for the mixer later.
Thank you, Justine. It was great to see his work. I have to say, variety, diversity, and incredible talent of our students doesn't stop to amaze me. To say, Irvin, Richard, Liang, and Justine, you all have done something different and excellent in your own way. And it's great to be able to share your talents and successes with our current students and also with all our alumni. So I'm glad to be able to see you on a personal level. It's just great to come together, especially after 1 year like this one. And it's also great to see a variety of work, some done before the pandemic and some done during the pandemic. I think it's interesting for our students that might need to make a decision. So that's why we're at 2019, a fully model, hands-on thesis, and others that are completely from 2020, completely digital, because our students now are in hybrid and can maybe choose different paths, some in person and some in Zoom. So I just want to thank you all. Thank you, Irvin, Richard, Liang, and Justine for being amazingly talented, for being with us and accepting our invitation. It's always great to see you back. And also now I'm gonna leave the microphone to Natasha, and our mixer is about to happen. And so thank you, please don't leave and be with our students because I'm sure they have a lot of questions for you. And for